Okay, let's unpack this. You asked for a deep dive into what it really takes to lead in these high-growth frontier economies. And we've zeroed in on the situation in Nepal.
Well, it's a perfect case study because it presents this paradox you see defining talent development all over the world right now. On one hand, you see MBA programs just multiplying everywhere. They're sold as this golden ticket, the gateway to the C-suite. And yet the data we have is it's astonishingly clear. A major 2024 survey of Nepali CEOs and top hiring managers, they reported that a staggering 73% believe recent MBA graduates are fundamentally underprepared for the leadership roles that actually matter, the ones that require execution. Now, here's the key distinction, and this is where it gets really specific. The deficiency isn't technical. It's not that at all. These graduates can build incredibly detailed discounted cash flow models. They can recite Porter's 5 forces in their sleep. The gap is not in that kind of knowledge. It's in something far more foundational. It's the ability to operate and to succeed in an unstable, unpredictable environment.
Exactly. What we're really looking at today is what the sources are calling the curriculum context chasm. It's this profound structural mismatch between the imported, mostly Western business frameworks and the actual capabilities you need to thrive in Nepal's very unique landscape. So our mission here is to move past the superficial value of a credential and really isolate the critical skills, the skills that truly dictate business outcomes in that market. Because if the traditional classroom isn't producing these leaders, then we have to ask, where's the market forging them? This is a deep dive into competence, not just classroom compliance.
Let's start right at the source of this failure, then, this idea of the mismatched operating system. We know these MBA programs are built on what the research calls a Western pedagogical chassis. They operate on assumptions that, frankly, break down almost immediately in a frontier economy.
And if you look at what a standard MBA assumes, it's a stable, high-trust ecosystem. You're assuming robust, enforceable contracts. You're assuming a reliable, stable energy grid, an independent judiciary that settles commercial disputes quickly. When you analyze a case study at, say, a top Western business school, all of those things are they're taken for granted. They're the invisible foundation.
Right. You spend months analyzing Harvard Business School cases on how to optimize Procter & Gamble's global supply chain, which is a perfect optimization challenge in a perfect world. The assumption is your contract with the supplier is ironclad and, the lights will stay on 24/7.
But the reality in Nepal, and so many of these markets, is defined by the existence of what economists call institutional voids. Success there isn't contingent on optimizing in the presence of reliable intermediaries. It's about operating effectively in their absence.
But wait a minute. When you talk to technical graduates, they often argue that their financial models were perfect. It was the external factors, the chaos, that ruined them. So why does this technical mastery suddenly become so useless when it hits those institutional voids?
Because the models are built on predictable cash flows and manageable, quantifiable risk profiles. Those assumptions just shatter the moment contract enforcement becomes difficult and incredibly expensive. You can build the most beautiful DCF model, but if a major supplier defaults, or if a critical piece of infrastructure is down for 3 months, your model's output is totally meaningless. In a developed market, you rely on the courts. In this environment, you have to rely on relationships and reputational capital just to ensure commitment.
That structural contrast, that really is the definition of the chasm, isn't it? The curriculum trains you for a stable world.
While the true case study, the one that defines success in the market, is something completely different. It's building a supply chain from Burgundia, the main entry point from India, all the way up to a remote mountainous region like Jumla. You're not just dealing with logistics. You are navigating unpredictable road closures, dealing with local officials who might levy informal transit fees. And you're wrestling with a customs process that can only be described as Byzantine, where human whim, not a formal tariff schedule, drives all the risk.
So the result is that business schools are producing technically proficient graduates who are, for lack of a better term, contextually naive. They're trained to be excellent specialized cogs for a well-oiled machine that runs perfectly on paper. But Nepali businesses need versatile mechanics, people who can not only build the machine itself from mismatched parts, but also keep it running despite chronic chaos. It's a completely different job. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, when you hear these CEOs complain about underprepared graduates, they aren't asking for more theory. They are looking for what our sources define as an unteachable trinity of capabilities. And these are forged exclusively in the fire of real operational pressure.
Okay, if the skills are unteachable, what exactly are these CEOs looking for? What defines the true currency of leadership in that market? And why can't it be formalized into a curriculum?
Well, the first pillar is what they call operational grit.
And this is not just about working long hours. It's about creative resilience under chronic resource constraints. It's the deep muscle memory you build from constantly finding solutions when the textbook says the problem is impossible. We're talking about, say, the general manager who realizes the official production manual is useless because their factory faces 14 hours of power cuts a day. They don't wait for the government to fix it. They re-engineer the entire schedule, the staffing, the inventory, everything around those outages. Or you could think about the project lead on a critical project, like the Indrawati III hydropower development. They suddenly have to navigate unexpected, non-contractual local political demands that threaten to derail the entire thing. The only way through that is improvisation and deep contextual problem solving, not theory.
That makes perfect sense. So if grit is about keeping the machine running when everything's breaking, what do you need to actually get the parts and navigate the landscape? Which brings us to their second point, relationships. The second pillar is social capital and deep networks. But hold on, isn't professional networking taught in literally every MBA program in the world? How is this different? Why do the sources claim this is learned outside the classroom?
Because traditional networking is transactional. It's about exchanging cards and LinkedIn requests. In a low-trust, high-context society like Nepal, business moves at the speed of reputational trust, not legal contracts. This isn't transactional at all. It's deeply relational. The sources are emphatic about this. The most valuable network is a deep, intergenerational web of trust. And that's why the kinship and communal ties of established groups like the Marwari or New Era business communities, or even the tight alumni circles from old guard schools like St. Xavier's or Budhanal Kantha, that carries exponentially more commercial weight than a new graduate's LinkedIn network.
So these connections aren't just for, getting a job interview. They are fundamental to how you assess risk and gain a competitive edge.
Absolutely. They function as a kind of distributed intelligence system. The sources argue that what we might dismiss as simple gossip is, in fact, the most valuable competitive data you can get. They call it gossip as data. It's critical, timely intelligence on everything from a competitor's quiet land acquisition to an upcoming unannounced liquidity directive from the central bank. Access to that kind of information is a massive advantage that you simply can't buy or teach in a classroom. And that brings us to the third, and maybe the most critical element of this trinity, political savvy. And again, to be clear, this is not about political partisanship, not at all. It's a sophisticated, practical understanding of Nepal's applied political economy. The goal here is mapping that intricate dance between Singhdurbar, the seat of government, and the private sector. It's understanding that the formal rules are just a skeleton. The informal power structures, that's the muscle that actually moves the system.
You mentioned the difference between theoretical law and reality. Could you elaborate on that for the listener? I think that's a crucial distinction.
Of course. An MBA will teach you the letter of the law for foreign direct investment, or the official process for permitting a project. Political savvy, however, teaches you which joint secretary's unofficial endorsement is the actual green light, regardless of what the forms say. It teaches you how to map those informal power brokers and understand the political risks attached to different investments. Without that savvy, your business plan is just a document. It's not actually implementable.
So with the formal MBA really struggling to provide this crucial Trinity grit networks and savvy, the market is adapting. It has to. And this brings us to what the research calls alternative leadership forges. The market is creating its own pathways.
Right. And these new models, they offer a much, much higher ROI because they focus so intensely on context and speed of application.
Okay, let's look at the first one, the practitioner-led executive program. These are short, highly focused workshops run by seasoned executives. It's basically just-in-time wisdom. But why are these short private programs trusted more than, say, continuing education from a university? Isn't that just a cheaper executive MBA?
Not at all. The trust comes from the battle-tested nature of the knowledge itself. A university lecturer teaches generalized risk management theory, but a major CFO, leading a 2-day masterclass on managing foreign exchange risk during a sudden liquidity crunch, they are providing immediate executable heuristics. These programs bypass the academic bureaucracy entirely to deliver practical playbooks. They're about solutions for today, not theories for tomorrow. Then there's a second, more intimate model, the curated peer learning network. These are closed-door, trust-based groups, maybe 15 to 20 next-gen leaders, meeting confidentially to dissect real-time challenges. The value here is built on vulnerability and that shared context. You might have someone presenting their struggle with professionalizing a family-run board. That's a challenge that involves incredibly sensitive family dynamics, things you would never share in a public forum. This becomes a private brain trust, a form of collective intelligence, where the context is so specific it becomes infinitely more valuable than a standard networking event.
But the most powerful and sort of systemic shift that the sources detail is what they call apprenticeship capitalism. This suggests that Nepal's largest business houses, families like the Chaudharis, the Vaidyas, the Ketans, they've essentially become the nation's premier unaccredited business universities.
That is precisely the finding. These conglomerates, they recognize that the 24-month classroom cycle is too slow and way too generic. So they treat high-potential recruits as raw material for an internal accelerated program designed to deliver that unteachable trinity through forced high-pressure exposure.
And their internal curriculum is incredibly rigorous. The research shows this typical 3-year rotational apprenticeship, and just imagine this curriculum for a moment. 6 months dedicated solely to learning how to negotiate pricing and logistics with unpredictable Indian suppliers. Then a full year navigating the bureaucratic minefield of land acquisition and regulatory approvals. And then a significant stint just shadowing senior executives in government relations.
And the degree at the end of that rotation is the clearest possible measure of success. It's an invitation to lead a new business vertical with real P&L responsibility. This internal pathway is demonstrably faster, more direct, and ultimately far more effective at producing market-ready leaders than any formal classroom could ever be.
So what does this all mean for the strategic inflection point in talent development in Nepal? It seems to present two very distinct futures.
It does. The first scenario is one of devaluation. If the majority of MBA programs just cling to their generic, imported curricula, the MBA will inevitably lose its signaling value for C-suite roles. It will become a commodity for mid-management, for executing existing processes. And this creates a deeply entrenched, two-tiered talent market. On one track, you have managers, the MBAs, who optimize existing systems. On the other, you have the builders, the apprentices, who navigate chaos, create value, and ultimately run the largest parts of the economy. The country's most impactful leaders will increasingly come from that second group.
That sounds like a pretty grim outlook for academic institutions. So what's the optimistic path? The scenario of hybrid evolution.
This would require radical change. These schools would have to forge deep structural partnerships with the major business houses, co-designing the curriculum from the ground up. They'd have to stop teaching theories imported from stable economies and start addressing the institutional voids head-on. The curriculum shift would be dramatic. Mandatory core requirements would include courses like Applied Political Economy of Nepal or Managing Supply Chains Under Extreme Uncertainty, and these courses would need to be taught by professors of practice, current or recently retired senior executives, and top bureaucrats, not full-time academics.
And the key mechanism would be to integrate that apprenticeship capitalism model right into the formal school, kind of mirroring what the Indian School of Business did.
Precisely. A mandatory year-long rotational apprenticeship baked right into the program. Then those institutions would attract the best talent because their graduates could not only analyze a complex balance sheet, but could also navigate the corridors of Singha Durbar at the same time.
Which brings us all the way back to the hard truths for you, the aspiring leader listening right now, who's maybe considering that traditional degree. The sources argue pretty strongly that a classroom-based MBA in its current form is a profound misallocation of your most precious resource time. The opportunity cost of being insulated from the market for 24 months is just immense. That classroom, with its perfect theoretical cases, it's nothing more than a flight simulator. It's excellent preparation for a stable environment, like flying a commercial jet. But Nepal's economy is a real-time dogfight in turbulent skies, where variables change by the minute. You need actual flight hours under stress to build that trinity of grit, networks, and savvy. And time spent in the simulator is time you're not spending building the networks that actually matter.
The core finding across all the sources is crystal clear. True leadership in these frontier economies prioritizes relational competence, that web of trust, those deep networks, that political understanding, and operational resilience far, far above theoretical financial expertise. The value is in knowing how to build the machine in the chaos, not just how to analyze its theoretical performance on a spreadsheet.
And if this deep dive shows us that success really hinges on inherited networks, on intergenerational trust, and a political savvy that's learned exclusively through high-stakes exposure outside the formal system, it raises a really important question for you to consider. In economies that are defined by these voids and dominated by apprenticeship capitalism, how does the aspiring leader who lacks those initial connections, the kinship ties, the old guard school network, how do they break into that circle of influence? What's their first, most decisive, non-traditional step? Think about that as you plan your pathway to leadership.